and work on that, and that's what eventually developed into our technology plan. But that was big enough that it took a little extra time. So I think May 1 deadline to do the community engagement portion, where we go out, get the ideas, cast a wide net, and then go through some type of a writing committee, is very achievable. Looking forward to see what comes out of that process. Very much enjoyed being a part of it from the community side. Looking forward to being a part of it from the board side.
Barb?
If I recall correctly, Kathy and I worked on the ad hoc committee together, and we started with Leadership Lincoln and United Way. And I just want to refresh our memories a little bit, because I don't want us to forget what I thought was one of the most important components, and that was the invitation to Lincoln High and then North Star, if I remember correctly, of a community-wide conversation that was first kicked off by some of our own in-house experts going and explaining some of the challenges before us, and then also inviting some community leaders from minority communities to explain from their perspectives some of the challenges before us. And I thought that started that process really well, because we had like 300-400 people show up at each of those big community-wide, please come and talk with us occasions. And then we went into that more formalized version, where we invited community members to start to bring this down into a more workable scale. But I hope that we start with that initial wide net.
Thank you. Other comments?
Can I make a...
Steve?
I'd like to just go back to the sped review for a second. You know, I've had a chance to go through that report a couple of different times. I know we've had a lot of staff do it as well, too. And we commissioned it as a review of special education, and in fact, we got it. But the more that we look at those opportunities, it's really about struggling students. So, you know, we're going to cast a wider net. And in fact, one of those opportunities is really about the common work, the collaborative work between general ed and special education, so that we're in sync as we progress students along the continuum. So the language is fine, but we're really going to be focusing on struggling. So our goal to get to 90% is to make sure that we find those kids that are falling through the cracks. And that's going to be across the district in all demographics.
All right. Laura, would you please call the roll on the 2016-17 board and superintendent goals and priorities?
Ms. Mumgard?
Yes.
Mr. Schulte?
Yes.
Ms. Byer?
Yes.
Mr. Boswell?
Yes.
Mrs. Danick?
Yes.
Mrs. Duncan?
Yes.
Mr. Mayhew?
Yes. All right. Next, that brings us down to informational items. Are there any committee chairs who would like to give a report on the work that their committees are doing? Seeing none, Lanny, is there a report from the Career Academy?
The Career Academy board has not been since our last meeting, but meets tomorrow morning.
Very good. And then that brings us to the superintendent's update. Dr. Joel.
I can be brief. You know, last week was a very, very good week. We had an opportunity to kick it off with the beginning of the year, kick off with our administrators. Had a lot of fun, but also conveyed a lot of information, a lot of energy there. That was at Southeast. Mr. Mayhew did a great job of addressing the group. And then we had Dr. Weber reported shortly after we brought the teachers in, new teachers in for breakfast, that we hired our 400th teacher. So that might be a record. I mean, we're excited. They come to us from all over. They've done a great job. HR has done a fantastic job of recruiting some of the best and brightest. So we're really excited about that. We're bracing for enrollment numbers. You know, I don't think there's any secret there. Principals have been very, very good this year of letting us know where the hot spots are. Mrs. Duncan was invited to one of our buildings where there's 34 new families that have come in from around the country and also around the area as well too. So we're seeing a lot of influx into Lincoln and into LPS, and as I've had opportunity and you've had opportunity as well interacting with some of the business groups, you know, there might not be any major expansions occurring, but there certainly are just, you know, a couple of folks here and a couple of folks there, and incrementally that's having a pretty profound effect. So, we're anticipating 900 plus. Now, if that's if they all show, and we don't lose any from now, but you're going to be hearing more and more about some of our high schools that are, Lincoln High is over 2,000. Lincoln East is a little bit over 1,900, and wasn't very long ago, they were 1,400. So, there's just a lot more kids coming in the system. I think when I began as superintendent, if I'm correct, and if I'm not, somebody on my team will correct me first thing tomorrow morning, I know we're averaging about 2,700 students per class, and consistently now we're going to be over 3,000 and on its way up. So it's a great problem to have, but by the same token, that's an awful lot of students that are going to be coming into the system. So hence, staff, we feel like we're appropriately staffed, but it's going to be an exciting year. We're really looking forward to the new energy, the goals, working on a strat plan, really focusing in on, who are our struggling students, how can we bolster them, but even more importantly, just continuing to harness that great energy that we have to go forward. And that concludes my report.
Thanks, Steve. All right, that brings us to announcements of upcoming events for the board. Tomorrow, as was mentioned, we've got the Career Academy Joint Board Meeting in the morning. Next week, can't believe it's come this quickly, is the first day of school. And then that takes us to our next board meeting on Tuesday, August 23rd. That brings us to our second public comment. Is there anyone who wishes to address the board? Seeing none, there is a request for a closed session for reasons number 1, negotiations, number 2, real estate, and number 7, legal advice. Is there a motion? Kathy?
Move that with the board recess and move into closed session following the ESU meeting for items 1, 2, and 7.
Thank you. Barb?
I second that.
Discussion? Seeing none, Laura, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Byer,
Yes.
Mr. Boswell,
Yes.
Mrs. Danick,
Yes.
Ms. Mungard,
Ms. Mumgarde says yes.
Mr. Schulte,
Yes.
Mr. Mayhew.
Yes. That brings us to the end of our regular meeting. We will now recess and move into the ESU 18 meeting. Pass that down.
I hereby call this meeting of the ESU 18 Board of Education to order. Laura, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Byer,
Here.
Mr. Boswell,
Present.
Mrs. Danick,
Here.
Mrs. Duncan,
Here.
Mr. Mayhew,
Present.
Ms. Mungard,
Here.
Mr. Schulte.
Here. As required by law, the Nebraska Opens Meeting Act is posted in the rear of the room. Tonight we have our public hearing on the ESU 18 2016-17 proposed budget. I hereby open this public hearing before the Board of Educational Service Unit Number 18. This hearing is conducted under the provisions of the Nebraska Budget Act and other Nebraska laws. The purpose of this hearing is to receive input regarding the proposed budget for the 2016-17 school fiscal year. The input received in this hearing will be taken into consideration by the board when we take action on the proposed budget. Would the first person wishing to speak please come forward now? Seeing no one wishing to speak, I hereby close this public hearing. We will now continue on with the agenda. Next item is approval of the minutes. We have one set of minutes from our last meeting. Are there any additions or corrections? Seeing none, the minutes are approved as published. Our next item of business for first reading, the 2016-17 ESU 18 budget adoption. Dr. Standish.
Good evening again. We have a very brief ESU budget presentation for you this evening. When working with Mr. Boswell and Mr. Schulte, one of the questions that came up here was the publication document that was published in the paper that's available with the agenda is one that's driven by state statute that meets all the compliance, and it's actually a form that we can't manipulate much. It does a lot of the calculations for you. So they said, can we present something publicly that will actually give the 15-16 budget where we expect to be for the projected 15-16 budget side by side with the 16-17 budget. And so very quickly I did what we all do, and I go to my budget book and I turn to page 307, And that is where that ESU information is available. There's actually program breakouts if anyone wants to review the programs within the ESU on the following pages. So we just thought it would be worthwhile to make note to fellow board members, since this will be coming back for adoption at our next meeting, and to the public, that if they want more details on the ESU budget, that's where you can find it readily available. And this is a summary from our June 30th work session, once again. And this just shows some of the line item changes in the ESU budget. We followed these in June 30th. I don't think there's been any follow-up question to go line by line through them again, but just once again making it available that here's some of the changes that were proposed for the ESU. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions you have on the ESU budget. Once again, we don't have line items that they would react to any changes in the general fund or cooperative fund, because there is some interaction there, but nothing that we would anticipate as far as between proposed to adopted. We do have assessed valuation still in front of us.
Are there any questions or comments? Matt?
I had a couple questions. That slide, the one that we added in there, there's a couple of lines where we budget money, but then there's no expenditures, at least this year and the year prior. Particularly, I'm looking at like federal programs and special projects are the two that are jumping off to me right away. You know, that's totaling $270,000. Could you just help me understand the purpose of us budgeting money that we don't spend?
Sure. So each year, we're always estimating what we expect to spend. And so, for example, if our Division of Evaluation Services within the ESU were to take on a special project, and they were to bill for that project and have that flow through, we always have to have the authority to do that. And so sometimes when we're developing budgets, we're preparing for authority for the future. And so we've had a past practice of doing that. That would also be federal funds. You might not have something come in, but you want to be prepared so you can react to it. What happens if we actually were to be faced with what would be overspending our budget if we didn't have those placeholders in there? If a project came in, we would go through a whole formal budget adoption process again, with a public hearing, with the 2 readings, with the notice in the newspaper. And so having some of those placeholders in there protects us from, if something happens over the next 13 months that could have been anticipated, then we don't have to go through that process.
When you said billing out for a special project, am I remembering this correctly, that technically the ESU can serve non-LPS schools? So we could do some projects for private schools, parochial schools in town. Would that be an example of a special project?
Right, and it could be an example of even when we're hosting professional development and we publish that and we have participants from non-public schools. That would be an example of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess a couple of things, couple of just thoughts. I'd like, I talked with Lanny about this. Thanks for adding this in. I really appreciate it. A couple things that, just as I think about our service now as the ESU board, is I'd like for us to get, I went back and looked, and we generally don't get any sort of budget versus actual reporting of actual expenditures reported to the ESU throughout the year. And so I was wondering if we could get a report maybe mid-year when we do one of our normal meetings.
Right, we also talked about the cycle of ESU meetings and
Right.
when they occur.
Yeah.
So I think that staff is always welcome to offering financial information. So when we find a meeting that makes sense, I think we'd be happy to produce what we can.
Okay, good. It just would be, I think it'd be good for us to be able to see, hey, look, we've got some places we're not spending and others that we are. I think it'd be just very helpful for us to do. No, that's good.
Okay. Does anyone else wish to have a comment or question? I would just like to note, the ESU doesn't have its own committees, so I'd just like to thank the Finance Committee for LPS. I think it works really well the way we blend our information together, with the work sessions, how we break out the ESU as part of the other funds. It seems to flow pretty smoothly. And another thing, in addition to doing a mid-year meeting where we could look at some of that financial information, I also like to encourage you, anytime that we have the monthly financial report on our regular LPS meeting, that's an entirely appropriate time to ask about the ESU information's in there too. So with that, this item will come back to us at our next meeting for approval.
I had a comment then about something not related to the budget. So I'm not sure if there'd be a time where I could.
Well, let's see, I guess if it's not on our agenda, we can't take action on it.
Correct.
Mr. Gusford, is there any concern?
I would not recommend that you act on it tonight.
Yeah, it wouldn't be an action item. This would be something that Annie and I talked about. You may not remember this. This was 6 or 7 months ago. But I think one thing that the ESU would really benefit from is just a simple website.
I actually had that down here.
That just says who it is, what it is, and maybe even mentions that we can serve other non-public schools and what some of those services might look like. I think that would just be really good for transparency's sake for us as the ESU board. So just a comment, it's not really an action item. I'm not sure how that would.
Well, I think we could review the information that we have up on the LPS website about the ESU.
And we actually met last spring. Mrs. Mumgard brought this up when she first started the position. I think in your role, you work with ESUs across the state. And Brian has developed a website for the ESU, and I believe it is live now.
Oh, really?
I think it's
Okay.
very basic, so we're open to suggestions on how to expand, but I just got the head nod that it is up. So we have one.
Okay.
And feel free to.
I've got something else I'd like to ask for.
Feel free to give us feedback on it, right? Okay.
I'll put it through my How I Access ESU paces for you, Brian.
Yeah.
All right.
If you
We're-
could
we're
send
open
us
to
a link to
feedback.
that so we
Absolutely.
could look at it, that'd be helpful.
Yep.
All right, and with that, we have now reached the time for public comment. Would anyone like to come forward and address the board of the ESU? Seeing none, I do not have a request for a closed session, so the ESU board adjourns and the LPS board remains in recess.